Yo, what up guys? Back again with another video in the Spigot series. In this video I'm going to show you how to continue what we started last episode where we create a dead body plugin. Alright guys, I'm having a bad hair day, so I'm going to put my hoodie on and pretend my hair doesn't exist. Anyway, so what I'm going to do now is we're going to continue what we started. Last episode we made sort of, a decent amount of progress. We made an NPC that whenever you die, it spawns where you die. It's laying down like it's a dead body. It doesn't have any name tag. What else? That's pretty much it. I think that's pretty much it. And so yeah, it took a lot of time, but we didn't do too much exactly. So what we're going to do this episode is finish this plugin pretty much so that it does all the other stuff we want to do. So I'm just going to give you a quick demonstration of what the final result is going to be, and then we'll continue coding it, okay? Alright guys, I'm joining the server now. I have the finished version of this plugin. And so I have some items in my inventory right now. So when I die, an NPC is going to spawn like we did last episode, and all of my items are going to go into that NPC. And I have an option. So if I go to that NPC within 10 seconds of me dying and I right click it, then I will get all of my items back and the dead body will disappear. Otherwise, if I do nothing within 10 seconds, if I don't reclaim my items, or if somebody else on the server doesn't claim the items, then the dead body is going to sink into the ground and all the items will go back to the person who died. All right. And of course, 10 seconds, it's very small, but realistically on a real server, you would probably want to set it to something like, like 30 minutes or something that makes sense, like a faction server, right? That'd be kind of cool to have. All right, so let me demonstrate this to you real quick. Just ignore all these armor stands here. So let me go to a spot right here. So I'm going to do /suicide. My items will not drop on the ground. It'll go into the NPC, like I said. And then it's right here, so I right click it. Or actually, I'm going to leave it and watch what happens. So 10 seconds should go by very soon here. And look, so I get all my items back and he sinks into the ground. So it's kind of like a cool little animation. And you can play around with the animation. You'll see how to do that. And then it says, your dead body has rotted and your items have been returned if you died with any. So pretty simple, right? But it's pretty cool because this is all using NMS and packets, right? So it's not the easiest thing to do. It may seem like it's the easiest thing to do, but it's not very easy if you're new to NMS and packets. So yeah, so we're doing a lot of different things in this plugin. You'll see we're doing stuff with tasks. We're creating data models. We're working with NPCs. A lot of cool stuff. And so let me go ahead and show you one more time. If I do claim my items, so I'm gonna kill myself one more time again. /suicide. That'll work. Turn around, right click it, and all the items, like shoot out, and then I can pick them up and claim them for myself. So yeah, hopefully you find that really cool and you're excited to make this plugin. I like it myself, so yeah, let's do it. Okay, so let's jump into IntelliJ. And the first thing I want to do is we forgot to do this last episode. Instead of using the notch skin for every single person that dies, let's make it so that the skin of the NPC, the dead body, is the skin of the player who died, because that makes more sense, obviously, right? And so we want to grab the game profile of the person who died and access it and extract the signature and the texture from it. So then we can copy it over into this new game profile that we're creating for the NPC. All right, so we'll call it game profile, dead profile is what we'll name it, is equal to, and then we need to, so we already have the craft player up here of the person who died, so we'll do craft player dot get handle, or get handle dot get game profile. There we go. So since we have that, now we can just get rid of this. There, damn, this is long as hell. There we go. And then do dead profile dot get properties dot get, and then we need a string key. The key is going to be textures, as we see here when we're creating it, but when we're grabbing it, we'll put textures here, and that's going to return a collection of some generic type. So what we can do is just cast this to an array, so to array, or not cast it, but convert it to an array, and then we just want to access the first one. So kind of a weird piece of code here, but just getting the property from the game profile, getting the textures property, casting it, or converting it to an array rather, and then getting the first element of that. And the first element that it returns should be a property. That would make sense because right here we're creating a new property, so we can expect this property that we're accessing to return a property object. So instead of So we can just actually cut this and put that into a property object. So property is equal to that. And then what's the problem? Probably have to cast it. There we go. Because this returns an object, just a generic object type. This is a property, so we have to cast the object into a property. And then finally we can do property dot get signature. That will obviously give you the signature. Let's do the same thing for the texture here. Property dot get value. And that will give you the texture, hopefully. So we're copying it from the person who died, putting it into a new game profile, and then that will be the skin of the NPC that we create, the dead body. So let's go ahead and test this out on the server to make sure it works. All right, so I'm going to kill myself, and we should have a NPC. There we go. You can see it already. Our NPC, it has the skin of me. So I'm Santa Claus, and he is Santa Claus, not Notch anymore. And it drops all the items on the ground because that's the default functionality of when you die, obviously. So we have to override that to make it so that we take all those items and then store it somewhere. So let's think about how we're going to do this, what we need to do. So essentially, every time a person dies, we're creating an NPC, right? And then we want to make it so that after a certain amount of time, let's say 10 seconds, the NPC, despawns or sinks into the ground, whatever you want to call it. Now, the way we're going to do that is with a task that runs continuously and checks to see if all the NPCs on the server, all the dead bodies on the server, have existed for at least 10 seconds. And if it has, then you run the logic to delete it. So that would not be very expensive on the server's resources if you just have a simple asynchronous thread running over and over and over every tick or so, right? Modern computers are able to handle that with no issue. That's nothing. So that's how we're going to do it. And we just have to think about how we're going to store our NPCs now. So what is the thing that our task is going to be looping over, is what we have to think about. And we can approach this from an object-oriented perspective. If everything that we're trying to store can be combined into one class, then we can easily access it that way. And the things we need to store is the NPC itself, the person who died, or their UUID perhaps, their items, because we need to save that, when they died, so that the task knows when to delete it. And yeah, that's pretty much it. And so let's just go ahead and try making a new class for that, new Java class called Body. So here we go, we got a body class, and now let's just model out what we're going to be storing. So private, and okay, the first obvious thing is going to be the NPC itself. So we can either store the entity ID of the NPC, or we can store the server player NMS object itself. Now, the easiest thing would be to store the server player object itself, because then we don't have to do any stuff to get that server player object back. And so that's what we're going to do. So server player NPC, so private server player NPC, because of the way that this is, it's artificial. This server player does not exist on the server. So I think if we just stored the NPC entity ID instead of the server player object, it would be hard to get that same server player object back because it doesn't exist on the server. So how are we going to grab it from the server, right? It only exists for clients on the server that we show it to, who we send the package to. So that would be the easiest thing for now until we have to make changes later on to make it persistent or something else. We'll get to that. We'll get to that later down the road. Okay. So private server player NPC, that represents the dead body that we have spawned for the clients on the server. What else? Private, and we can do player P, the person who died. Although the trickiness with that is if the person who died originally has left the server and you try accessing this player field here while they're off the server, we're going to get exceptions because the player has to be on the server. So otherwise you could store an offline player object, but I think just, a simple thing that I like to do is just to store the UUID itself. So you can do that as a string or as the UUID object. It doesn't matter. Now, what else do we want to store? Okay, let's also store when they died, so private, and we can store it as a date. We can store it as a local date. You have so many options for how you want to store such data, but I'm going to store it as a long. So we'll call it private long when died. So the reason we're doing a long is because time in Java and most programming languages in general is represented as either seconds or milliseconds since epoch time. So MS since epoch time. Now, if you're not familiar with epoch time, it's like it's a specific date for computers. I believe it's like, let me just look it up real quick. It's in January of 1970 something, I think. Epoch time. Okay, so January 1st, 1970. So milliseconds since Jan 1st, 1970. And this is like a standard for computers to keep track of time. If you just keep track of time as milliseconds or seconds, then you can universally know when you are currently, instead of having to store it as something like, maybe, let's say we didn't have, epoch time. Let's just say we were forced to store everything as like a string date. That would be very tricky, right? So private string date is equal to, what's today? 11/21/2021, 11:33 p.m. Like, that'd be so weird just for computers to store time like that. In this case, Java uses milliseconds, but other languages like PHP and maybe JavaScript also, they just use seconds, all right? So it depends, but whatever, same concept. You can easily convert between the two. Actually, the more proper way of saying this would be not the milliseconds since epoch time, but it would just be epoch time itself. Epoch time is literally, if you just look it up, it says epoch time is the Unix epoch, aka the number of seconds that have elapsed since January 1st, 1970 midnight UTC time, not counting leap seconds. So you get the point, I think. Anyway, so we got when they died, the UID of the player who died, and then the NPC of the dead body. And then we're going to change this to who died. How about that? And I think one more thing we want to store right now is also the contents of their inventory when they died. So private item stack array contents. We'll say, well, yeah, we'll just call it contents. And the reason it's a item stack array is because when you do inventory.get contents, it returns a item stack array. So we don't have to do much conversion to store it into this. But yeah, so the reason again that we want to store the contents of their inventory in the first place is because, as you saw in the example earlier, they have an option to reclaim the items. Well, someone who comes across the body can steal the items, or if it's not claimed within 10 seconds, then the items will go back to the original player. So if we're going to do that, we're going to need to store the items at the time of death, and that's how we'll do it. We'll store it within this body class here, or this object here, okay? All right, cool. So let's go ahead and finish this off. That sounded kind of sus, but code generate getter and setter. So we're going to create a getter and setter method for each of these fields here. And then we're going to create a default constructor. So generate constructor, select none, and then looks good. So essentially we have a class now. We can create objects using a default constructor. We can also create a constructor with all parameters if we want to. Or not parameters, but fields. So you can just create it all at once. Yeah, pretty cool. So simple Pojo, plain old Java object. Now we need to decide how we're going to store these bodies when we create them. You can choose where you want to do that. Just for me, normally when I do these types of things, I store them within the main plugin class, but I don't know, that just feels wrong. Especially, considering we're going to be doing a bunch of stuff with it. So I'm just going to make a manager, so a body manager. So the body manager will be responsible for holding all of the bodies, as well as doing certain operations like deleting the NPC, stuff like that. All right. So we're going to store it as a private list of bodies, of body objects. So private list body, import that, bodies. There we go. And then we're going to create a new generate constructor. We don't need this. So whenever you create a new body manager object, we're going to initialize the bodies field by doing a new array list. There we go. And then what else do we need to do? So we're going to create an accessor method or a getter method for this bodies list here, so that through the body manager object, you can access all of the bodies stored on the server currently, because we're going to need it in other places like our task, and also when they right click the dead body and stuff like that. Okay. So code generate getter bodies. So now we can access this list of bodies. So yeah, a lot of this is pretty simple stuff, unless you don't have a strong foundation, Java principles and stuff like that. But if you don't, then go ahead and check out my Java series. You can get a good understanding of how to do object-oriented stuff. It's all very basic so far. So what we're going to do now that we have a way to store all the bodies and access them and all that, is we're going to create the bodies. So we're going to create the bodies within our death listener, because when they die is it makes sense that when they die, that's when we're going to create the body, obviously, right? So let's make it so that our spawn body method is the thing that's responsible for creating the body itself. So let's have it return, instead of void, a body. So private body spawn body. There we go. So when we call this method, we're just going to create it right away. So body is equal to new body. We don't need to pass anything to the constructor because we have a default constructor that we created a second ago. And so we can set some information. So body.set NPC, we don't have that yet at this point. Who died? So who died is just going to be p.get unique ID. Body.set when died. Okay, we can do that. So set when died. There's two ways you can get this. The epoch time is you can do new date dot get time, and that will return a long of the epoch time for this data object here. Or an easy way to do this, or a more efficient way probably, is also to do system dot current time milliseconds. That will give you the same thing. So there we go. So that's going to store the epoch time of exactly the point at which they died. And then we're going to, you'll see what we do with that in a second. So body dot set, and then we can also set the contents. So the contents of the person when they die, we can do p dot get, and we can do get inventory dot get contents, and that will, as I told you a second ago, return an array of item stacks. And we're just setting it to the contents field in our body object. Okie dokie, so let's go down here, and right here is where we create the NPC. So we can go ahead and do body dot set NPC, because this our set NPC method obviously stores a server player object. So when we create our NPC, our dead body server player object, we can just go ahead and store it right away. And then down here at the very bottom, we can go ahead and return our body. All done. There we go. So very, very simple. We're not doing anything, revolutionary. We have a body object. We're setting the fields of it, setting all the information. And then once all this is done running, all these packets have been sent and everything, all that magic stuff, it's going to return that body object that we have just created. So up here, we can go ahead and store that. So body is equal to spawn body. And then we can store that within our body manager. So our body manager, we can go ahead, we need to access our body manager within this somehow, our death listener. So there's different ways we can obtain a body manager instance. We can, literally just create it right here if we wanted to. So body manager is equal to new body manager. And then we can do body manager.get bodies and, add the body to it. But the problem with that is because the bodies list here is not static. Every time you create a new instance of body manager, a new object, you're creating a new list of bodies. So that doesn't really work for us, right? Because we want to have a list of bodies that can be accessed anywhere, and they're all the same thing. So you can either make this static and then, do body manager.bodies to access it statically, or you can have one body manager object that lives within your plugin and then pass that to wherever you need it so that you'll be able to obtain the same list of bodies. So what we're going to do is go to our main plugin class and just store that instance here. So we're going to do private body manager, and then we can either initialize it up here if we wanted to, or we can do it in our onEnable. So this dot body manager is equal to new body manager. And then since our instance of our plugin class is being passed into our death listener, this means that if we have a getter method, code generate getter body manager, we can access that getter within death listener through the class instance. So we're going to do, instead of this, we're going to do bodied.get body manager, and bodied comes from here where we pass an instance of the main plugin class to our constructor, and then we're storing into this field here. So now we're accessing it, getting the body manager, and then down here we can do body manager dot get bodies dot add body. There we go. So now our body has been added to the bodies list in our body manager, and we can access it in other places just by doing the same thing. Now, another thing we saw is that when the player dies, this is the default functionality of Minecraft, their items drop onto the ground. So if we want to prevent that, because what we're doing is we're taking all of the items and storing into the body object, if we want to then prevent the bodies from dropping on the ground because they're stored in the body, we can do e.getDrops, and this returns a list of item stacks, which represents all the items that will drop on the ground, and do .clear. And there's no e.set drops, because since you're just accessing a list of bodies, you can just by the way that objects work, you can modify or call the methods of that object, and then modify it that way. And for another plugin, maybe if you want to customize what items are dropped on the ground when a player dies, you can do it through this get drops method. So you can add items to it, delete items from it, whatever you want to do. Now let's do the fun part that I like to do, and make the task that deletes the body after 10 seconds if no one has claimed it. And yeah, so we're going to make a new package here. So new package, we'll call it tasks just for orderliness, and do new Java class body remover task. I think that's a descriptive name. And then extends bucket runnable. So normally when I make my bucket runnables, my bucket tasks, I just create them anonymously. I don't make a whole class for it, but just for structure and orderliness, I'll put it into its own class. It makes more sense. Okay, so let's think about how this is going to work. So essentially we want to make it so that this task runs every second. So let's make it so it does that. So every second we want to run this task here. All right. So we're going to create the task here within our onEnable. So new body remover task dot run task asynchronously. We'll do run task timer asynchronously. So what this is going to do is, first of all, it'll be an asynchronous task running on an asynchronous thread. So it'll be separate from the main plugin thread. And then, well, first of all, we need to pass an instance of the plugin. And then now we have a delay. So this is going to be how much time in ticks that it's going to wait before running this task or starting it. And then now we have a period, which is going to be the time period between task runs. So if we wanted to run every second, then we would do 20 ticks. So 20 L for long. If you want to do it half a second, then we do 10. If you want to do it for a minute, you do 20 times 60. So yeah, so that will create the task, and we can come back here. And so every time this task runs, every second, it's going to call this run method here. So we have to think about what we want to happen every single second. So, well, our body manager now stores all of the bodies on the server, so that'll include the NPC, and that has vital information about each body. So what we want to do is access that body manager, the bodies list, every single time this runs, and then check to see the elapsed time between when they died and the current time. So if it's 10 seconds or more, then we remove the body. Now, that makes sense, doesn't it, right? So we're going to do body manager dot get drops. Or we don't. Okay, so we need an instance of body manager, right? Forgot about that. It's not static, so we can't do it that way. So we're going to do private final body manager and the reason it's final is because we're going to initialize it with a constructor. So add a constructor parameter. It's going to do some magic for you. IntelliJ is really smart. So this means that whenever you create a new instance of this body remover task, it's going to pass in a instance of body manager, and then you can now use it within this class. So if you go back to Bodied, IntelliJ has intelligently passed in the instance of body manager that it requires now for the constructor. So very cool. So now inside of here, we can do body manager dot get bodies, and we can iterate over it to check each body every second. Now there's different ways to iterate over a list in Java, many different ways. You can create streams, you can create a regular for loop, a enhanced for loop, a for each loop. You can do iterators. So yeah, lots of options here. But since we have an asynchronous task and we're trying to access a list on the asynchronous task, we can get something called a concurrent modification exception. And I've actually found this out firsthand when I was making this plugin before. And so I don't know the exact reason of this concurrent modification exception, but the point is that concurrency and threads and all that is very tricky, especially when they're asynchronous. So you can imagine that certain problems would arise if you're trying to access a list from threads. Because if you think about it, maybe what if the asynchronous thread overlaps? So let's say that this thread runs every second. So while this one is running, this thread could run again. So they could overlap a little bit, and they could be trying to access the same list at the same time in a way. Not likely, I would say, but still, I guess it's sort of possible, but unlikely. And then also another issue that may arise, I would imagine, is that since we have both synchronous with the main thread and also asynchronous tasks, they could also both try accessing the same list at the same time and modifying it. So that could, create that concurrent modification exception. So you just have to be wary of that and maybe brush up on your concurrency practices And yeah, I'm not a concurrency expert at the moment, but so just with that in mind, we have to change how we would normally do it. So normally I would just create a stream and loop through it with a for each part of a for each operation on that stream. But with this, to avoid a concurrent modification exception, we have to use an iterator. And iterators are not very used. They're not used very much anymore, from what I've seen. Just because streams are way more popular nowadays. It's way easier to use a stream, or just a regular enhanced for loop. But they do exist, and I believe all collections have iterators within them. They allow iterators, maybe most of them, if not all of them. And so with an iterator, we can do iterator body. So the iterator is containing body objects within it. Body iterator is equal to body manager dot get bodies dot iterator. So this will give you a new iterator, and we can use this iterator just like we would with the stream or a for loop. We can iterate over each thing and avoid a concurrent modification exception. So we can make a while loop here, while body iterator dot has next, meaning that there's an element that we can iterate onto and loop over. So while it has next, we can do body is equal to body iterator dot next. So since it has next, we're going to get that element that we can use in this iteration and then do stuff with it. So what we want to do is see if 10 seconds has elapsed since the creation of this body. So we know that body has this get when died long, which represents the epoch time of when they died. And epoch time is always growing every single millisecond in Java because, time is always traveling. Just time, how time works. And so if we get the difference between the current time and the time at which the body was created, then that will give you how much time has elapsed. So since it's a long representing milliseconds, the difference will represent how much milliseconds have elapsed since in between those two times. So if we do if body dot, well, first of all, we need the current time, right? So we do long now is equal to system dot current time milliseconds. And then we'll do now minus when they died, so body dot get when died. And if that's greater than or equal to 10,000, then we know 10 seconds has elapsed between the current time and when they died. So if 10 seconds has elapsed, then we want to remove the body. And since we're using a body iterator, we can do body iterator dot remove, which removes the current element that we're iterating over from the iterator. But we can still access it because we store it into a body variable here. And so what we're going to do with that body variable is, well, one thing that we have to do is, first of all, let's just tell the player the body was not claimed, and then give their items back. So tell the player the body was not claimed, and then give their items back. That's the two main things that we're going to do right now. So let's try that out. Let's get the player who died. So we'll do player who died is equal to body dot get, and we can do get who died, which returns a UUID, and we can do bucket dot get player, pass in that UUID, and then if that player is null, then that player is not online, so we can't message them. So if it's not null, then they are online, we can message them as well as give their items back. All right, so put that in here. So message them. So we'll do player who died dot send message. Your body has not been claimed within 10 seconds and has rotted. Your items have been returned to you. Try not to die again. Simple enough. That is self-explanatory. So give the items back. This one's a little more tricky. So within the body object, we have all of the items here. So this is an item stack array. And let's go ahead and go back here to refresh our memory of how we set that. So def listener. Within our def listener, we just did body.setContents, p.getInventory.getContents. Okay, simple enough. And let's just go ahead and print this out to the console so we know, what the data looks like before we mess with it, okay? And you'll see why I'm doing this, because you'll see that it may not be what you expect if you haven't worked with body.getContents before, or inventory.getContents. And then otherwise, if the player is not on the server, then we'll just say, well, we don't need to say anything at all. Okay, so simple enough so far. Simple task that runs every single second. And then every second, it's going to get all the bodies on the server, check to see if it has been 10 seconds since the body has been on the ground. And if 10 seconds has elapsed and it has not been claimed, then it's going to send them a message and then print out the item stored in the body. So let's go ahead and run this, put it on the server to see what happens. All right, I'm back on the server now, so I'm going to kill myself real quick. So I'm going to run over here, do /suicide, and let's make sure that we look out for exceptions as they happen. Put it on my other screen, and I'll let you know if we get any. So /suicide, no exceptions at the moment, and then here's our body, looks good. And then we'll wait for 10 seconds. It should elapse very soon. Okay, cool. Your body has not been claimed and within 10 seconds and has rotted. Your items have been returned to you. Try not to die again. So, perfect. Nothing wrong so far. And then we also did print out the contents, and this is what we got. So we got an array here, and everything is null. So if you're not familiar with this, you may ask, why would inventory.getContents just give you an array of nulls? That doesn't really help us, but it actually does. The reason it gives you an array of nulls is because each element in that array represents a single slot within your inventory. So if you're iterating over this array, you know that even if that element is null, you know what slot you're on because of the index mapping directly to the slot within the inventory. Because inventory slots in Minecraft are very important so that you know where you're putting it, especially when you have these special slots in here and all that stuff. But yeah, that's why we have that. But we want to make sure that since we're given the items back, we want to make sure that there's no nulls in the array, or we could get a null exception. And just null is something we want to avoid. So let's filter out all of the nulls from this array here, because they're not always going to be null, right? If we died with items in our inventory, then we're not going to have all nulls. So we're going to take that array, filter out all the nulls, and turn it back into an array, and then use that, and take the remaining items, and then give it back to the player. Now, the easiest way to do this is actually not to do it when we need the array of items. It's actually when we set the array of items. So let's just do it right at the source. So if we go back to the def listener, when we call it body.setContents, let's not just pass it in directly. Let's go ahead and filter it. So to filter it, I like to filter things using a stream filter. So we can just do .stream, and that's going to do arrays.stream, pass in the array. And now we can do stream operations on this. So we can do .filter. And so for each item in this stream currently, we want to say if item stack is not equal to null, then return true. So it's passing through the filter. Otherwise, return false. And then from this point on, we'll have a stream of only non-null item stacks. So we can do toArray. That's a method available to streams. And this will just pass in item stack array : new. That's a method reference. So if you're not familiar with streams, you're not very strong with streams, it's okay. It's kind of self-explanatory. So a stream is just simply a special kind of iterator for looping over and iterating over lists and collections and doing operations upon them. Or arrays. I just said list and collections, but arrays too. So looping over this array one by one in our stream, filtering out all of the null values, and then converting it back into an array because setContent it requires an array. So let's convert it back to an array using this method reference here. Okay, so we can simplify this, by the way, by doing this, and then boom. So there we go. So now let's go ahead and do the part where we give the items back. So we're just going to get this contents, the body contents. Let's first just get the inventory of the person we're about to put it into. Does that make sense? I think so. That sounded sus. So player who died, get inventory. And then now we can do inventory.add item. And this actually takes in var args. So you can either put it, one item stack or an array of item stacks or as many as you want. So we'll just do body.getContents. So it's going to take all of these item stacks and then put it into the inventory. And now you have to think about what happens when the inventory is filled up. What if we can't fit, some items? Whenever it cannot fit items, it's going to go ahead and return a hash map of integer and item stack key pairs. And in the documentation, let's go ahead and remind ourselves what that means. So we'll go to inventory. Oh, wrong one. let's see, inventory. There we go. And then let's find the method, add item. So the returned hash map contains what it couldn't store, where the key or the integer is the index of the parameter and the value is the item stack at that index of the var args parameter. If all the items are stored, it will return an empty hash map, okay? So we don't really need the key of this hash map because we don't really care what the slot is. Let's just go ahead and get all of the item stacks that it couldn't store into the inventory and then drop them at the player's feet. So we'll do get or just values. This will return all of the values without the keys as a collection. So with all of those values, and then we want to loop over it. So stream dot for each. So for each item stack, we want to do we want to drop it at the player's feet. So we'll do player who died dot get world dot drop item, player who died dot get location, and then we want to pass in the item stack. So item stack. So that will do exactly what we want it to do. It'll just drop the item at that location that we specified. And yeah, so just simplify that. There we go. Okay, so it says your body has not been claimed, blah, 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 but nothing happened with our inventory. That's because when we died, we didn't have any items, so there's nothing to give back. So let's go ahead and give ourselves some items. To give ourselves a bunch of bones. Now we'll kill ourselves. And hopefully it'll, yeah, give the items back. There we go. So it gave all the items back perfectly. And there's nothing to drop at our feet just because our inventory was not full, but it'll work. Okay, let's go ahead and continue our work here. Other than making it so that the player is messaged and we give their items back, we want to make it so that the NPC that we have laying down disappears from the server and it sinks into the ground using that cool animation that we saw. Now, the way we're going to do that is we're going to do it within this task here, but we're going to make a new task that runs, it's essentially another task within that task that's spawning out of that task that runs every single second or however many ticks you want it to run. And then it's going to just decrease the location of the NPC by, whatever you specify it by. So it's going to sink into the ground by a repeating task, just running every however long you want it. And then at the end of that, whenever it's done sinking to the ground, at the end of that, it's going to go ahead and delete itself from the server. The NPC will be deleted using packets. Because we created it using packets artificially, so we're going to delete it using packets artificially. Now that probably didn't make a lot of sense, so let's just go ahead and do it so you can see firsthand what I'm talking about. So we're going to make a new task here, so a new bucket runnable, run. So in this case, we're not making a whole class for it since we already have a class for body remover task. What's inside of this code here will be much smaller than what's inside of this code, so it makes more sense to just have this like whatever you call this, anonymous. So we'll just declare it on the fly, okay? So inside of this task, whenever it runs, we want to make it so that the NPC decreases by a certain amount on the y-axis, so it sinks slowly into the ground, okay? Now let's go ahead and get the current location of the NPC. So location is equal to body.getNPC.getBucketEntity.getLocation, because it's easy to represent location using bucket locations. And then you have to remember that because of the way that packets work, we have to send a new packet to each player on the server that's going to see this NPC, because if you don't, they're not going to see any change with the NPC. So we have to send an entity teleport packet to every player on the server so that they see the NPC moving on the server. So we do bucket.getOnlinePlayers.forEach. And for each player on the server, we want to get their connection. So what's it called again? Server, game, packet, listener, implementation. There we go. PS is equal to, now we have to do craft player, we got to cast it, right? That's what we got to do. Player.getHandle.connection. So we're getting the connection of that player. And then we're going to send them a new packet. So send new client bound entity, or here it is, teleport entity packet. New client bound teleport entity packet. And this requires the entity itself that you're trying to teleport. So what we have to do in between here is modify the NPC. So modify their position, pass in the NPC, and it should do all the work for us. It'll pass all that data, and then hopefully it'll teleport it. All right. So we're going to get the NPC. So we'll do body.getNPC.setPosition, so POS. So we already have the current location. So now we can modify that and then place it into here to change the location in that NPC object. So we're going to do location.getX. We're not going to modify that one. Location.getY. We're going to modify this one by something small like maybe 0.5. And then location.getZ. So we're going to leave the Z alone. So the Z is not modified. Let's do a smaller amount because that's pretty big. So we'll do like 0.01. And then we'll pass in body to this because it requires an entity. And there we go. So essentially what this should do, what's the problem here? Cannot resolve constructor. Oh yeah, body.getNPC. There we go. So what this should do, just as a quick recap, is every time this task runs, it's going to get the location of the current NPC. And then it's going to send a packet to each player on the server telling them that that NPC has been teleported to a new location, which is their current location minus 0.01 on the y-axis. So we'll do run task timer asynchronously. So this is also going to be asynchronous. Squid game, or not squid game, what am I talking about? And then we want to pass in the instance of this plugin. So let's just have it up here. So private final bodied. Import that, pass it in, boom, boom. And now, well, technically we don't need this anymore because we can access it through bodied, but we'll just leave it for now. So pass in bodied. Now we need the delay, and the delay will be 0, so to start doing it right away. And now we need the period. So the period is up to you. So the faster it is, the more smooth it'll be. Because if you think about it, if there's more time in between iterations of this task you're running, it will look, less smooth just because it's running less frequently. So if we set it to something like every 5 ticks, that'll be 1/4 of a second. So 20 ticks is 1 second. So 5 ticks will be 1/4 of a second. So about 25 milliseconds, I guess. And yeah, so that should look smooth enough. Let's find out for sure. And with luck, this NPC will sink into the ground without any issues. Okay, let's go ahead and die on the crafting table here just so that we can see it go downwards easily. So respawn, go. And after 10 seconds, it should start going down. Let's find out. There it is, look at that. So it's sinking down slowly. So every 1/4 of a second, it runs that task. Pretty cool, right? So you may wonder how long is this going to go for, and the answer is forever until you cancel a task, which we're not doing. So we just spawned a new asynchronous task that will run forever, and it doesn't have any stopping condition, so it won't cancel itself, and it'll just keep going even though it's in the ground right now. There's nothing that stops it. So let's go ahead and try and decide how we're going to make the task stop itself. Here we'll say stop myself when the body is fully in the ground. So we need to make a simple piece of code that determines if the body's in the ground. And there's actually an easy way to do that. So from the location, we can do location.getBlock, and then we can do is passable. So if it's passable, this means that it's an air block, a light block, or something like that. And if it's not passable, then it's a solid block. So if the location is passable, this means that they're still visible because this means that they're inside of a visible block. If they're inside of a non-passable block, then we can assume that they're in a solid block, so they're hidden. So if that location now represents a passable block, because the location is always changing, right, as we have up here, this means that we can now do this .cancel. So this asynchronous thread that we have created, or task rather, is then going to cancel itself, so it's not going to iterate anymore. And then before we cancel it, actually, we want to do delete the NPC from the server, because there's no point in having it anymore. We'll just go ahead and delete it using packets and stuff. But before we do that, let's go ahead and test it out to see if it works or not. So now it didn't do anything. So that's interesting. So it didn't even go down at all. Now there's no exceptions in the console. So this means that we can assume that the task is running, it's deleting itself right away. So this condition turns out to be true somehow. Now the reason that is just because I tested this out before by doing a bunch of debugging statements and printing out information. The reason that this is happening is because this location here is going to be the location of under the player. So even though they look like they're on top currently, that location object is actually going to be right under that player. So what we can do is just do location.add by 1 on the y-axis, and then we'll get the one above that. So that'll give us the proper location that we need. So we'll do location.add 0, 1, and then 0. And so that will get the block above that. And once that block becomes solid, then it will delete the NPC from, or cancel the task, okay? All right, body's over here. So let's wait for it to go down. There he is. Look, he's sinking slowly. And boom, he's gone. He's still going down though, but eventually that block right above, because we did +1, should become fully solid, and he'll delete him. The task will stop running rather, so he'll stop sinking. There we go. He stopped sinking, so we can assume that the task could then cancel itself. So let's go ahead and do this part. Let's make it so that the NPC is not visible on the server to players anymore. So we'll do exactly what we did up here. We're going to loop through all the players on the server and then send that packet one by one, or the package that we need to make it so that they don't appear anymore. So it depends on what you need to do. If you don't want the player to exist on the server anymore, both on the scoreboard, the tab list, and visually, then you need to send 2 packets. So the first packet you're going to send is the info packet, so do ps.send new player info packet, client-bound player info packet, and then into this, the action we're going to pass is usually add player, but in this case, it would make sense to do remove player. And that should remove them from the tab list, but they're already not on it because of the way that we set this up. But I guess we'll just send it again just so y'all can see, for example, how you might do that. So we'll pass in the server player, which is going to be body.getNPC. And then now to remove them visually, you have to send a different packet, which we have not done before. It's called new client-bound remove entities packet. So client-bound remove entities packet, and then you pass in the integer, the entity ID of that entity. So NPC or body.getNPC.getID, and that should give you the entity ID of the player, the NPC that you're trying to remove in this case. So let's go ahead and test this out to make sure it works. Here's the body that just spawned when I died. Let's go ahead and wait for him to start sinking down, and we should watch him disappear. Okay, he's sinking now. There, he's gone. Perfect. So the package did work, and he's not on the tab list. He was never on the tab list because we already called that packet, like I said, but you cannot see him visually anymore, so he doesn't exist to any clients on the server, and that's awesome. This means that we're almost done with this plugin. The last thing we need to do is make it so that when you come across an NPC and you right-click on it, it'll give you all the items in that body. So for a faction server, for example, you come across a dead body, right-click it, and then you get the items of the player who died. Very, very simple. And that NPC is despawned as well in that situation, so that another person cannot come around and claim the items off that body either a second time. Now the issue with this one is quite tricky, and I have a challenge for you guys. So first let me go ahead and show you the problem, and then I'll give you the challenge. What we need to do is figure out a way to detect when a player right-clicks on a NPC. Now you would think that the player interact entity event is the way to go for that, but you're going to see that that is actually not going to work in this case. So let me go ahead and demonstrate that to you. So here we're going to make a new event handler. The name is self-explanatory, and there's also player interact at entity events. They're a little different. It depends on the circumstance, but you'll see that no matter which one we call, it's not going to work. So we'll say poopy sauce for this one, and just to humor myself, we'll do the other one as well. So player interact at entity event. So we'll say poopy sauce 2, so we know which one's running if they do call. And there we go. So let's run this and to see if it works on an NPC. Actually, first let's go ahead and make it so that the NPC is standing. You'll see why in a second. So when we spawn the NPC, that's actually back here. Instead of making it sleeping, we'll have it standing. Now we have a standing body. If we right-click or hit it, nothing happens. So as you can see in our console, nothing is printed out. And that's because, due to the way that this works, because we're artificially creating a fake NPC, sending that packet to each player on the server, to their clients, the server does not know of the existence of this entity. Only the clients know of the existence of this entity here. And because events are triggered whenever something happens on the server detects something that happens. These 2 events that we created, or the event handlers that we created, will never be called because the server never detects that the player has right-clicked or interacted with a entity or a fake NPC because it doesn't know of his existence, right? So we need an alternative way to detect when a NPC is interacted with on the server. And the way you would do this is actually with protocol lib, or it doesn't have to be protocol lib, but that's an easy way to do it. It's by listening on the server for incoming packets. So the server will still receive the player interacts entity packet or whatever the corresponding packet is for that. But again, the player interacts entity event will never be triggered because the server doesn't know that the entity exists. So when it receives that packet, it doesn't do anything with it. So if we create a packet listener using protocol lib or whatever other thing you want to use, that's how you can detect if someone right clicks or interacts with a NPC that you've created yourself. Okay, and that's simple enough. That'd be perfect if we were, needing that. And that's actually perfect for our needs. But a new problem arises is that when you set the NPC to sleeping, so pose.sleeping, the bounding box or the hitbox of the player shrinks to a really, really small point. So you can only interact with the NPC at a specific point on the server. So it's really weird. So it becomes really hard for your client to interact with an NPC on the server because of the bounding box being so small. Therefore, the packet is very rarely sent unless you hit it on that specific point. If you right-click that specific little point right under the name tag of the sleeping NPC, then the packet will be sent. Otherwise, it won't. So that's a huge issue I've been dealing with, and I challenge you who's watching and who wants to, get better at NMS to come up with a solution. And if you come up with a working solution, then please let me know, DM me on Discord or something like that, and I'll reward you with points on the Discord server. And then also I'll shout you out in the next video on the Spigot series, so that'd be kind of cool. So if any of you can come up with a working solution for how to detect whenever you right-click a sleeping NPC using NMS or packets or whatever, then let me know, okay? My understanding for the best way to do it would be to somehow modify the bounding box of the NPC using NMS and packets, but I have not found a way to do that. I don't see any packet that represents bounding box or how to modify it, so it's quite a challenge. So hopefully one of you guys can figure it out, and let me know. So what we're going to do instead is, instead of using just the regular interact packet and listening for that, to detect when a player right-clicks an NPC, we're going to do it a sort of hacky way. What we're going to do is make it so that when we spawn this NMS NPC here, we're going to put 3 armor stands right here, 3 little armor stands right here, so that technically when you right-click it, you're not directly, interacting with this NPC here. You're going to be interacting with the invisible armor stands that are on top of it. So it's a hacky way to do it, but it works and gets the job done. So that's how we're going to do it. But I would prefer a way to do it how I just described before, so that you can just right-click it like that. So let's go ahead and make those armor stands spawn on top of the NPC whenever we create it. So right here is where we'll put that. So this will be armor stands, so that we can artificially detect NPC interaction. And again, if the NPC is not sleeping, if they're just standing up like a normal NPC, then all you have to do is listen for the packet that is sent from the client to the server and determine if the entity ID sent in that packet is one of our NPCs that we've created artificially. But in this case, we can't do that because the bounding box or whatever represents the hitbox that the interact happens with is messed up. So we're going to need 3 different armor stands because whenever the player's laying down, they're pretty much spread across 3 different block zones. So you can have one here, and then have another here. So let's do that. So armor stand 1 is equal to, we'll do get world dot spawn entity, and then get location. Actually, not get location. We want to spawn it at the NPC's location. So npc dot get bucket entity dot get location. And then now we need the entity type, so this will be an armor stand. So armor stand, there we go. So this spawn entity will return a entity object, and since we know it's an armor stand, we can cast it into armor stand and store it into this armor stand variable. And then after that, we can modify it. So armor stand 1 dot set, we can set it to small, so it's like a midget armor stand, and then set it to be invisible, true. Well, for now, we'll make it to false so we can know where it is, so y'all can see visually what's happening. And then what else do we want? So set invulnerable, so it cannot be broken. That's important. So armor stand 1 dot set a gravity to false, so it does not fall. And that should be good for what we need. So let's go ahead and run this real quick on the server to see if it actually spawns the armor stand at the NPC's location before we spawn the other 2 armor stands. Okie dokie, so /suicide. There it is, the body, and here's the NPC, or the armor stand on top of the NPC. So this one spawns at his foot. So all we need to do is spawn another one in the middle and then another one on the right. So the way we're going to do that is, if you notice, every time we create a new NPC, they always spawn in the same direction. They're always laying from this way to this way in the same axis plane. So if we do F3, we can, oops, not that. F3, we can see that it's always in the X axis. So as we walk this way from their head, from their toes to their head, we see that the X is increasing, not the Z or not the Y, okay? So what we need to do is simply get the location of the first armor stand and then add it by 1 on the X axis, or subtract it by 1, because you can see that it's actually decreasing on the X if you look closely. So that's simple enough. Let's do that 2 more times and then it should spawn the other 2. So we'll just copy this one here, paste it, and then paste the third one. So we'll change all these to 2, 2, 2, 2, 2, and then 3, 3, 3, 3, 3. And you may want to make a method for this, but I'm lazy, so I'll just leave it like this. It's not really that crucial. So now we'll do get location.subtract, and like I said, we just want to subtract it from the X by 1, so it's the next block over. And yeah, and then this one, instead of subtracting it by 1, we must subtract it by 2, since it's 2 blocks over in this case for the third one. All right, so let's check this out. And now we can see all 3 armor stands are on the body right here. And they're small armor stands, because we don't really need them to be big armor stands, because then it's like higher than it needs to be. But as we right click, it should detect it now. And there we go. So in our console, we see that it prints out Poopy Sauce 2, and that's from the player interact at entity event. So the second one here is being triggered. So this means that we don't need this one. So to detect when we right click an armor stand, we only need this event. And so when this event is triggered, we want to see what armor stand was right clicked. And given that armor stand, we want to see if that armor stand is a part of a specific NPC. And if it is, we want to get that NPC and then delete it and do all the stuff with that, okay? Now that's easy peasy. So let's also make it so that the NPCs are invisible now. So invisible to true. Now, there's many different ways we can detect, what the armor stand is a part of, because you think about it this way. We can detect whenever someone right-clicks on an armor stand, but there's no way to detect what NPC that armor stand is for. So the easiest way to do this really is just to add a new field to our body class here that stores each of the armor stands. So private list armor stands. And then now, whenever we want to check all the armor stands of a body, we can just loop through this and look for it to see if it's contained within that. And so when we create a new body, let's go ahead and make sure that this is initialized, or we'll get a null exception when we try accessing the list. So we'll do armor stand list is equal to new array list. And right here where we create the armor stands, let's do body.add or get, or we need to create a getter for that, don't we? So we'll do code generate getter for armor stand list. Therefore, now we can do get armor stand list dot add armor stand 1 body dot get armor stand list dot add armor stand 2, and the same thing for 3. So now that the body object stores the armor stands associated with it, whenever we right click on an armor stand, we can get all of the bodies on the server, loop through them, and see if that armor stand is a part of any of those bodies, so that we know which body it's a part of, if it's part of one. So first, let's check to see if it's an armor stand, because it can be any type of entity, of course. So e.get right clicked returns a entity. So we'll say if e.get right clicked is an instance of armor stand, okay, and then if it's an instance of armor stand, we'll just cast that to an AS or armor stand. And then we need to iterate through each of the bodies like we did before and check each of them to see if that armor stand is a part of any of those bodies. So we'll do iterator, body iterator is equal to bodied.get body manager.get bodies.iterator while body iterator dot has next body is equal to body iterator dot next. And so we'll say if body dot get armor stand list contains the armor stand. If that's true, this means that we want to remove the body, give the items back, and then tell the player play a sound, whatever. So what's the problem here? It says patterns. Oh yeah, so we're using Java, I think 8 right now. So if we change this to Java 16, we can use this pattern matching that we just tried right there. So let's go up here, change this to 1.8 to 16, and that will let us use Java 16 on our project, okay? Boom. All right, so to remove the body, all we got to do is do what we did a second ago within our body remover task. So let's just copy that code. Actually, instead of just copying our code and having duplicated code, let's just cut this and then put it into body manager. So we're going to create a new method within body manager, public void remove NPC, remove body NPC, and then boom. And this will just pass in body. So now we can do body manager, or bodied in this case, dot get body manager, dot remove body NPC, and then pass in body, and that should remove it by calling this code here. And we'll go back to here and do the same thing. So body manager dot remove body NPC body. There we go. And so that removes the body, so it's visually gone from the player's site. Let's also remove it from the iterator so that it's no longer able to be looped over. So body iterator dot remove. There we go. Now let's give the items back. So we'll do this similar to how we just did with the other part, except that this time we're not giving it back to the player's inventory. We just want to drop it on the ground in front of the player on the body. So when they right-click the body, we're going to drop all the items from that body onto the ground. So we'll just loop through all of the items. So for item stack item body dot get contents. So we can do, well, first of all, we need the player who actually interacted with the event. So let's do player who clicked. So who clicked dot get world dot drop item, and then instead of using the player's location, we're going to use the body location. So body dot get NPC dot get location, bucket entity dot get location. So I get the bucket representation of the NPC's location currently, and then we just pass in the item like we did before. So what that should do is just drop the item on the NPC's location one by one. And now let's tell the player, so who clicked dot send message, you have claimed someone else's, you have looted someone else's body. If they had any items, it will appear. And then let's send a cool sound. So we'll do who clicked dot play sound, who clicked get location, sound dot, we'll do something with the chest because that makes sense. We'll do chest close, or how about open because you're opening the contents of a dead body, I guess. Kind of morbid, but there you go. Okay, so all very simple. I'll just recap it real quick. Whenever you right click on a armor stand, what it's going to do is check to see if it's an armor stand first of all. Then it's going to get the player who clicked on them, iterate through all of the bodies stored on the server currently using iterator, get the body one by one, check to see if the armor stand that was right clicked is a part of any of those bodies. If it was, it's going to remove that body from the iterator, remove it from the server so no players can see the body anymore, and then drop each of the items stored within that body one by one if there is any, and then it'll send the player a message and then play a sound. So let's go ahead and run this to see if it works. Here we got the body right here. The armor stands are now invisible. If I right click, look, all the items just spawned. Perfect. So it says you have looted someone else's body. If they had any items, it will appear, and it did. So awesome, it worked perfectly. The NPC disappeared, gave all the items back, sent the message, and we can also assume this is sent the sound, but I didn't hear it because I don't have any audio right now. Now, one final thing I want to do is just spice it up a little bit by making it so that the items shoot up into the air. So like a little cool animation to drop all the items. So that's actually really easy to do. So whenever we drop an item, we just want to increase the y coordinate by 1. So we'll say double y is equal to 0.0 or just 0.5, and then get location dot add 0, y, 0. So it's going to add onto that y each time it drops a new item. So it'll shoot up into the air. That's the thing we're going for. Oh yeah, we forgot to do one thing. We forgot to actually increase the y value. So we just need to go here and do y is equal to y plus the amount that you want to add it by every single time. So we'll just do it by 0.5 each time. So each time we drop an item, it's going to increase it by 0.5, the y value. Okie dokie, let's hurry up and grab it. Right click, and boom, look, all the items shoot up into the air. What the fuck? There we go, all the items shot up into the air. It looks awesome in my opinion. And that's pretty much it with this plugin, you know. Now you know how to do a lot of stuff with NPCs now, how to spawn NPCs, how to modify them, make it so that they have no name tag, change their skin, make it so that they move by teleporting them, remove them from the server. Did I already say that? I forgot. Yeah, a bunch of cool stuff. Make their pose different. So hopefully you enjoyed this episode on NMS. If you have any ideas for future episodes, then please let me know. I'm always looking to show you guys some more advanced stuff, and yeah, let me know what you guys want to see, okay? But these two videos that I made on this plugin, it's a lot of code that we did and very, very extensive, and you know, it's hard to, you know, scroll through like a 50-minute video. So what I'm going to do is I'll have a link for all of the code for this episode in the description below, so you can check it out like I always do. So if you want to see the completed code for this plugin, so you can just look at it and all that, come back to it at any point, then you can use that and use it as a Mojang mapping reference as well. Then yeah, check it out. Make sure you bookmark it, start the repository, all that fun stuff, and yeah, enjoy. Alright, so that's it for this video. Thanks for watching. In the description below, I'll leave a link to the code for this episode, so you can check it out. You can bookmark it, come back to it later. If you forget any concepts or you just want to review the concepts I taught in this video, I'll mark everything up with comments, so you can come back and read the code without having to rewatch the video, although your reviews are greatly appreciated. So yeah, I'll leave a link for that in the description below, so make sure to check it out. And another thing is I'll leave a link to our Discord server. It's a big community for programmers. You can ask for help on your programming projects if you're stuck on something, or maybe you can get some new friends. If you don't have any friends, there's lots of people here. It's growing really fast. You can find lots of people who are passionate about the same things as you. For example, if you like Minecraft Spigot development, you can find lots of people who like that. If you like C++, if you like Java, if you like web development, it's a really, really big programming community. So feel free to join. There's a link for that in the description below. And the last thing I want to tell you is that if you want to support this channel, you can click the join button below this video, and you can join this channel as a member for as low as 99 cents a month, and you can cancel at any time. You get some cool perks like early access to all of my new videos, a cool rank on my Discord server like you see right here on the side, YouTube members, and also you get to see yourself on the screen like you see right now. So if that sounds cool to you, feel free to join. If you don't want to, that's fine. If you can't, that's okay too. I really just appreciate you watching the video anyway. And thank you. Thanks a lot. And that's it. So if you like this video, leave a like. If you want to see more, subscribe. And peace.